Welcome everybody to WebChat with Minnesota Adult Education. This is a special session today, not just because it is May Day. It is May 1st, 2024. This session is also our annual Adult Education Grant Application Workshop. So a very special session today and a lot of information for you. So we hope that you are ready to learn about the new grant application process. Let's get started. Let's start with some introductions. We have our adult education team and some additional folks today joining us to help with today's session. I'll kick us off. My name is Brad Haskamp. I work at the Minnesota Department of Education as the State Adult Education Director. And I'll hand it off to Neil.
Hello, everyone. My name is Neil Allard. My pronouns are they, them. I'm the Communications and Administrative Support and Records Specialist.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Dinko. I'm the Transition Specialist, and my pronouns are she, her. I'll turn it over to Astrid.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Astrid Leiden. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Professional Development Specialist. Turn over to Brandy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brandy Logan. I go by she, her, and I am the Accountability and High School Equivalency Specialist. I'll turn it over to Haley.
Hi, everybody. My name is Haley Swanson. My pronouns are she, her, and my role at MDE is the Records Specialist and Grant Support, and I will pass it on to Jody.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you this afternoon. I'm Jody Versa. I'm the Program Quality Specialist on our team, and I'm going to turn it over to our colleague, Bet, who is joining us today. She is on the grants team at MDE.
Good afternoon, everyone. At Benson, I'm a grant coordinator at MDE, and I'll send it. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll send it back to Brad.
Thank you, Beth, for being here today. And we're also glad to have some additional folks providing some support for us as we present the new grant application process. Let's go to the next slide. So in our session today, we will provide some updates and announcements. And then we'll dive into the adult education grants overview, walk through that the annual application for our adult education or ABE funds. And then we'll make sure we have time for your questions as well, especially as we dive into this new process. So we're glad to have you here today to talk and to plan for the grant application process. Let's start with some updates and announcements. First announcement is, so we know we're going to be spending a lot of time about the annual grant application, but we also want you to remember that after that grant annual application, there is that August reporting submission. That August reporting submission is due August 1st. We will be sending out the form and additional details via email to all grantees in early June. And in that report, we're asking you to submit the level gains report, the annual volunteer information report. There are two new reports that you will need to submit this year, the staff required training report and the volunteer required training reports. So those will be two new things that we'll be asking for in that August reporting submission. The other pieces, effectiveness in serving employers, the IET or workforce training costs, the consortium's one-stop contributions, and the verification of your next year's aid calculation or funding, grant funding, will and the career service costs will all be part of that August reporting submission. Don't worry, you don't need the information yet, but just stay tuned that is coming after we get done with this annual grant application. And we will provide more information on this in addition to the email at a SID webinar in June and at our July web chat, which is on July 10th. And then I'm going to hand it over to Astrid to provide additional announcements and updates.
Thank you, Brad. So as Brad said, we have two new reports that are going to be required with your August data submission. And those relate to our staff training policy and volunteer training standards policy. So According to those policies, all of the trainings that are required need to be entered into SID. You can find those policies on the mnabe.org website in the policy section. And the training reports that you'll be turning in August are in the process of being finalized. So watch for emails from MDE. They'll be coming out from Neil with some more information on how to run those reports, reminders on how you enter that training information into SID. So you can expect the staff training one later this week and the volunteer training one in the next couple of weeks. Let's go to the next slide. So as Brad mentioned, another component of that August submission is completing the annual volunteer report. So we will be hosting a webinar with SID staff and Literacy Minnesota staff Thursday, June 6th, to provide some guidance on how to complete that report, as well as providing some additional support in entering volunteer trainings into SID and how to run that training report. So Neil has put the registration for that webinar in the chat. Thank you, Neil. Let's go to the next slide. So a handful of professional development announcements. One of the key components of our PD system here in Minnesota is incorporating the voices of practitioners from the field in our professional development planning. And we currently have openings on 3 of our PD advisory teams, and we want you to be part of this planning. There are openings on our transitions PD advisory team, the administrator PD advisory team, and then our statewide professional development committee. So we're looking for folks with interest and expertise in those areas. You can think about yourself or think about one of your colleagues who might be a good fit. The applications are posted on the Atlas application page, and they are due June 3rd. Let's go to the next slide. We also want to make sure that you've heard about the statewide mentorship experience. This is a new initiative that Atlas launched last year and piloted with great success. An opportunity to serve as a mentor or as a mentee with another colleague in another Minnesota program. You can learn more and apply on the Atlas website and hear some testimonials from folks who have already participated. The next cohort begins May 31st, and the deadline to be matched for this cohort is this Friday. So if this is something that you are interested in, or if you have a colleague who might benefit or might be a good fit for this, please make sure to pass the information along. Neil's put that link in the chat. The CCRS implementation cohort for the coming year is also open with a due date of June 3rd. This is an opportunity for a team from your program to go through an extensive cohort experience with others from around the state to learn how to plan standards-aligned lessons, evaluate and supplement instructional materials, and develop a long-term CCRS implementation plan. So ideally, a team would be at least one administrator and one teacher in the ELA and the math content area. However, we know some programs are smaller, so we can certainly work with you on that. So just reach out if you've got any questions about that cohort, and we hope that you'll consider participating. For those of you who have staff who are certified in the teacher verification model, we will be holding a refresher webinar coming up on May 30th. This will be an opportunity to review the key requirements of the teacher verification model, ask questions of our TVM team, and then just share resources and best practices for how TVM is working in your program. So if you have TVM certified staff, please encourage them to attend. If you have staff who are interested in getting certified, Neil has put a link to the page where you can get that information and some FAQs. Go to the next slide. Summer Institute is around the corner and registration open today. The early bird rates are good until June 30th. You'll see a big discount for land members, so encourage you to join. That will be held on August 14th and 15th, and it is virtual this year. Looking even further ahead, want to make sure that you mark your calendars for the events that are being planned for the coming year. We have a number of our statewide and regional activities already scheduled. So you can access this list in the PDF of the slides that is shared. Encourage you to mark your calendar so that you can attend. Go to the next slide. And then finally, just a reminder that consortium managers received an email first on the 18th of April and then again on the 29th of April regarding a computer-based testing survey. We're looking for one response per consortium by this Friday. And we're using this information to make some decisions about state purchase computer-based tests. We have some supplemental service funding available that's going to be used to purchase test administrations. And we want to hear from you about which tests you're planning to use and whether you are interested in any of those administrations. So whether or not you are, please take a few minutes to respond to that survey. And I am going to turn things over to Jody.
All right, thank you, Astrid. So we want to take the opportunity today to give a little update and briefly talk about contact hours and funding for this upcoming year. We know that is something that you are definitely all thinking about at this point of the year and trying to, do your best to make predictions and make plans for the upcoming year. So here are a few things that we know at this point and just some starting points and reminders as you're thinking about next year's funding. So just a reminder that we are back to the regular practice of using hours from May 1st through April 30th. We kind of had some shifts in that during COVID, but we are back to that as a regular practice. So your hours from May 1st, 2023 through April 30th, so through yesterday, are the hours that will be used to calculate this upcoming year's funding. Another thing that we are pretty sure of at this point is when we are thinking about the total amount of state funding that we will have available to distribute out to grantees, the finance staff here at MDE have let us know that they believe that that pot will be 2% bigger than it was last year. So that is great news. We want to recognize that the reason this is happening is because there was some excellent advocacy work at the state legislature last year. Thank you to Lan and the legislative committee and everybody who was involved in that advocacy. And we did get a change to state statute so that now our adult education system gets a little bit of an increase every year as long as K-12 is also getting an increase. So that is really great news. Also, we know that hours for this contact hour period that just ended at the end of April, in general, hours have increased statewide as compared to the previous year. So just a reminder that the way the formula works to distribute out and divide up the total pot between all of our grantees across the state is that when there are more contact hours, the contact hour rate, so the amount that gets that is associated with each hour, goes down. It's just a math problem. When you divide the total by a bigger number, then you end up with a smaller rate per hour. So we do know there'll be a 2% increase overall, but that's not enough to offset the contact hour increase. So what that means is we are very realistically looking at a contact hour rate for the upcoming year that will be lower than this year. So on the next slide, we do have an update for you about where we are at with statewide contact hours. So at this point, we can compare almost a whole year, not quite a whole year yet, because we know that probably some attendance and some hours from April have not been entered into SID yet. But here's what we can tell you. When you compare the 11-month period, so basically May through March, last year in that time period, or for the previous contact hour reporting period, we had just a little over 3 million hours. And this year, so for the contact hour reporting period that ended yesterday, actually, but not counting April, just up until the end of March, we had about 3.5 million hours. So the overall increase statewide is about 15%. So what that means for you as you're thinking about your funding for your consortium for the upcoming year, we encourage you to compare your growth as compared to that statewide growth. So I know if you've been around for a while, you've seen this this graphic before, but hopefully this gives you a simple visual representation of how you should be thinking about what your funding might look like for next year. So the graph on the left sort of represents the amount of hours in the previous year. And then this graph on the right represents what we are expecting for this current period that just ended yesterday. So you'll notice if you look at the blue lines, that represents what's happening statewide. So there's a bit of a bump. We're showing that to be, or we are at this point estimating that to be about 15% overall. When you look at the orange bars, you can see that that consortium, we'll call that Consortium A, they have also had an increase in hours, and it is more than 15%. So maybe they saw an 18% increase in contact hours from last year to this year. So that is, then it is reasonable to predict an increase in funding from this year or next year as compared to this year. On the other hand, those gray bars represent Consortium B, which you will see that Consortium B also had an increase in hours. So more hours this year than the previous year. However, Consortium B did not grow as much as the whole state did. So that maybe represents a growth of maybe 8% or 10%, which is less than the statewide growth of 15%. So in that case, that is reasonable then to predict a decrease in funding for Consortium B. So there are a bunch of other factors involved. Contact hours is not the only piece of the funding, but it is, or it's not the only piece of the funding formula, but it is the biggest piece, which is why we sort of focus on it the most. There are other factors that play in when determining exactly your award amount for next year, and we are not going to take the time today to review those, but I want to point you to a resource on the next slide here, where there was an excellent webinar back in February that I know some of you participated in, presented on, and listened in on about budgeting, about thinking about the upcoming year. If you want to have a bit of a reminder about more of the details of the funding formula and more of sort of the math problem of how to figure out what funding might look like for the upcoming year, we do encourage you to take a look at that recording. I'm just looking quickly at questions, but yeah, I don't see anything that we need to answer yet or that hasn't been answered. So I, at this point, am going to hand it over to Haley to give us an overview of grants.
Thanks, Jody. So since this is such a grant-focused webinar, that we jump into a short overview of grant funding in general in Minnesota. So on the next slide, we can look at a chart that shows generally how ABE programs are funded throughout the state. So as you probably know, the programs receive varied types of funding. For example, the main topic of this webinar, the annual ABE application for state and federal funding. So on this chart, you can see the annual ABE application is typically due on June 1st. And as the name suggests, the time period lasts for 1 year. We also have the federal adult education competition, which was last due March of 22. And then we can expect the next competition in spring of 28. So that's a 6-year competition for that grant. For IELCE grants, we had our last one due April 22nd, and we can expect that next competition to be on spring 2025. So those are generally 3-year grants. And then we also have the 5-year narrative, and this occurs every 5 to 6 years. The due date is typically June. And yes, as I mentioned, about a 5-year grant, which is exactly as the name suggests. So just to keep in mind, there are some other grant opportunities such as P2P and foundation grants, and those are, the dates will vary and the time periods that they last also vary. And then on the next slide, we can talk a little bit in more detail about what this webinar, the annual ABE application, is kind of referring to. So we have the federal and state adult education funding. And so just to highlight, for the federal funding, we have that federal competition is an application that reauthorizes your process for federal funding. For 22-25 will be the third year of the current 6-year grant cycle. And there is no federal adult education grant competition this year. The next competition will be scheduled for spring of 2028. And if we wanted to take a look at the state adult education funding, that one is authorized or reauthorized through the 5-year narrative. And it runs, as it suggests, on a rolling 5-year cycle. And each year, a group of about 7 to 9 consortia are required to submit that 5-year narrative. A couple of things that I want to highlight, though, is that these are the reauthorization for funding. What the annual application is the renewal process that each grantee goes through to be able to accept those funds. So for another item to note is that for state funding, there's no 5-year narratives due the same year that there's a federal grant competition. And then I'm going to go, if you want to go to the next slide, Neil. I will go ahead and pass it back off to Jody.
All right, thank you, Haley. So that was at this time of year, we just like to give all of you an overview of all of your different grants and applications. And we're just going to take a minute here, just a reminder to those of you who are deep in the 5-year narrative process. You know who you are. Obviously, nobody's forgotten about that at this point. But the cohort of consortia that are doing their 5-year narrative currently is in the blue box on the left here. That is due to our office on June 3rd. Just a reminder to this group of consortia, you do need to submit your narrative via email and the regular annual application, which we're going to talk about very soon here. So this year you need to submit both of those things. They are separate. Those are separate submissions. Then after you submit your narrative in June, you can throw a party and relax, because we know that was a ton of work. And the next step is at least a couple of the people here on our MDE team will plan a site visit to come out to your site this summer or this fall and talk more about your narrative and the feedback. Then on the next slide, so we've got another cohort of consortia who are kind of on deck to submit their narrative in 2025. And so the group of consortia in the blue box on the right on this slide are the ones who are going to be reviewing this year. I know I have reached out to you to get names of your reviewers, so thank you for everybody who has responded. Soon here in the month of May, we will be organizing review groups and getting more information to you about the review. But if you are in this cohort, what you can expect for a timeline is to be reviewing narratives during the month of June, and then we'll have a full day reviewer meeting on Tuesday, June 25th. That'll be via Zoom. Then you'll kind of get a break where you don't need to think about the narrative for a while, and you will kick off your sort of official narrative writing season with a workshop in October, on October 9th. So I see a couple questions in the chat. So specifically, when you submit the narrative, yes, it is very simple. You send an email. You can send that directly to me or to Neil or to Brandy or anyone on our team, but typically to me, to Jody. And yep, all we need is a link to the website. Clarice, we do not have a document that gives guidance about how to prepare for the site visit, but when we work on scheduling it with you, we will outline sort of exactly what we are hoping to do at that visit. For the most part, we do not expect you to prepare ahead of time. So we'll be sure to communicate clearly what our expectations are for that visit before we arrive. All right. I think that's all the questions I see at this point. So we are going to move on to finally like the big piece of information and guidance that we have for you today, which is about the annual ABE grant application. So we're going to spend basically all of the rest of the time that we have today giving you information and support about filling out this application. So the first question about the application is who needs to submit this? So we just want to clarify exactly whether or not you who are listening are folks who are involved with that. So as you hopefully know, our Minnesota adult education system is organized by consortia. So most of our consortia are geographic. Some of them are organized a little different way. But each of our consortium has one entity that is the fiscal agent. So in many cases, that's a school district. We have a few other kinds of fiscal agent entities. So that fiscal agent entity is the one that is responsible to submit one application for the entire consortium. So if you are the adult ed manager or someone who's involved with data and preparing the tables at the fiscal agent entity of your consortium, then this information is for you. If you are a teacher who's not involved in the application at all, or if you are a manager or a coordinator at a site or a program or a district that is not the fiscal agent of your consortium, then probably you are not involved with this application. So we just want to be really clear. If you realize now you're in the room and you're not going to need to work on this application and you want to step away, we will not be offended. We just want everybody to be really sure sort of who the correct audience is for this, for the application information. So the next big thing that you need to know and keep in mind about the annual application is that there is one big change, and that is that in the past, the application has been available through SERVS and submitted it to MDE through SERVS, and SERVS is going away. SERVS is a pretty old software program, and so it is being sunset. And our adult ed fund, our adult ed application will be shifting into a newer grant system called MEGS. So MEGS stands for Minnesota Education Grant System. So for the annual application this year, the content and what data and what information you need to provide is very similar to last year, but the format is going to be quite different. So we hope today to give you enough information and support that you can get started on that. So here's the very high level overview of what the annual application process looks like this year. So the first step is that contact information, an application narrative with some questions, and tables, just like tables we've had in previous years. All of that information needs to be filled out, but instead of filling it out on documents as you have in the past, you will actually enter that information into MEGS. So into the software system, and we're going to show you what that looks like. So that will be the first step. A second important step is that your Iowa, which Iowa is like the authority figure at your district or your organization, the person who has legal authority to sign things for the organization, that person has to also go into MEGS and accept the assurances within MEGS. So just a reminder, those assurances are just, they are the things that you are all agreeing to by accepting these funds. There's sort of details of things you have to do and things you can't do, things like that. And then the last step in the process is that your Iowa also has to virtually sign, so within MEGS, sign the application, and it needs to be submitted. So there's a submit button in MEGS. There's no email application, just that filling out everything in MEGS and hitting submit. And that needs to happen by June 3rd at 5 p.m. So we'll probably say this a few times today, but we encourage you to be very sure that your Iowa or whoever your Iowa's secretary or whoever kind of wrangles that person is aware of this deadline. Every year sometimes we have a little bit of a mad scramble right on the day of the deadline of like, oh, the superintendent's out on the golf course. So we just encourage you at this point, you've got about a month, reach out to your business office, reach out to your Iowa, and just make sure that they're aware that this process is happening and that Iowa has a very important role to play in the application. So, oh, excellent question, Scott. So Scott asked, is the grant up? My understanding is that yes, the ABE grant should be available in MEGS now as of quite recently today. So you wouldn't have been able to see it before today. But if you have MEGS access, thank you, Brad, for confirming. If you have MEGS access and if you are set up in EDM and have gotten permission through your Iowa, yes, you should be able to see the application in MEGS. So at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Bet, who is going to give us some more information and kind of walk us through what the application looks like in MEGS.
Thanks, Jody. Yeah, so we know that this PowerPoint is going to be a resource for folks. And so just so you all know, what's going to happen now is we're going to share a lot of screenshots and talk through it. But then afterwards, we're going to do a live demo where I actually go into MEGS and show you what everything looks like. So you're going to get the information in a couple of ways, but we're going to start with screenshots and then we'll do a live demo. So the link that Neil shared is the link to access MEGS now. And so if you follow that link, this is what page you would see, and you would click the logon button, which will bring us to our next slide. And this is going to look familiar to you if you had logged into Serves in the past. And so it will be your same user ID and password that you used with Serves, but it's now just going to be bringing you to the MEGS system versus the Serves system. So if you have not used EDIUM in the past or Serves, I know there's a lot of acronyms, so apologies for that. But if you have not logged in to create this account in the past, the first thing you'll have to do is click that don't have an account, create account link, and then that will walk you through a couple of steps and get you set up. If you have been in Serves in the past and you're logging in, but you are not seeing MEGS, which we'll show you what that looks like on the next slide, then that is going to be something that you work out with your Iowa and your business office. It is the Iowa and the business office who manage access within their own district or organization. And so it's not MDE staff who are able to give you that access. That happens through your Iowa. We'll happily support and figure out, what needs to happen if there's any confusion about what we need to do. But if you are logging in and you don't see MEGS, the first step is going to be to talk to your business office to get that access. And we'll give you that reminder again. Everything has to be submitted by 5 p.m. on June 3rd. So just again, make sure that everybody knows about that and are able to access long before June 3rd so they can get in and get all the information. So when you click the login button, you'll be brought to this screen. And if you do have MEGS access, this is what you'll see. It will say MEGS access/select. You click that button, and then that is what will bring you into the official system. So those are the steps. You will log in with your old serves login. It'll show you the MEGS access. And if you click that, then you're in MEGS. If you don't see this, you reach out to your Iowa and they should know how to grant access. And if not, we have an email address there, megs.mde@state.mn.us, that you would be able to reach out to for support, and we'll get you in there. Once you click the MEGS select, this is what MEGS is going to look like. So each of these boxes are what we call tiles. And so each of these tiles are either it's a data collection that MDE is requiring, or it's a funding opportunity, whether that's a competitive opportunity, a formula fund, or in this case, the ABE, FIN 322 and 438 opportunity. What I especially want to highlight on this page is that we're the state, we work by fiscal years, and so our funding comes via fiscal year. And so the way to organize and make sure that you are seeing this opportunity is you're going to have to click the drop down button for years and click the 2025 option in order to see the 2025 FIN 322 and 438 tile. Next slide, please. So once you've gotten to this point, if you are the very first person within your organization to look at the ABE opportunity, you're going to see what you see on the left, where it's create an application for 2025. You would click the hyperlink on 2025, and that will open the application. If someone else or you have gone in and already opened this, then the next time you come to log in, it's going to look like what it looks like on the right. There's a little bit more information, and there is a view grant application hyperlink. And that is what you would click to then get into the application. So just an overview of what MEGS looks like. So when you are in a specific opportunity, it's like reading. You're reading from left to right and top to bottom. And so specifically, you all are going to be working within, you'll be entering information into the contact information, application narrative, tables, assurances, and submit tabs. So we call them tabs. Each of those boxes is a tab, and they may have a sub-tab. And so again, we're going to go through each of these, but just highlighting that this is kind of the lay of the land. You'll see information on the top, and you'll be able to click into each of those tabs, which will bring you to even more information. So this first screenshot is a MEGS overview tab, and under overview, there's project overview, state funding details, federal funding details, expectations of grantees, resources, and then the application screening and review. This tab is all background information. So it is going to be where you go to learn all about the funding opportunity, who is eligible, what they can do, the specific state funding information, the specific federal funding information, expectations of grantees, all of that background information, which you're probably fairly familiar with, but it is all there for you to investigate and review. The next tab will be contact information. So it will be asking you for, of course, your administrative office address, as well as who your business manager is, who your Iowa is, and who your ABE program contact is. And I'll show you in MEGS that if you're already in MEGS, which many districts are, well, all districts are, you may be able to pull this information from your work that already exists in MEGS. So I'll show you how to do that, but if you're not, then there is also a way where you're able to enter everything as part of this application. The next tab is application narrative. Just maybe a bit of a misnomer. It is really some data collection. We're going to ask you which congressional district you are in, what county you are in, and then just some background information. Are you a nonprofit? What kind of funding are you applying for? And then what your program status is. So are you continuing? Are you realigned or restructured? Or are you new? And then we're going to get into tables. So I'm going to pass it back to Jody to talk through all the tables, and then we'll continue up with our screenshot overview of MEGS, and then I'll do the demo.
Thank you, Bet. Actually, this is Brad, and I'll start
Perfect.
off with the tables, but thank you so much. So just like last year, there are 4 tables that you will need to submit with your grant application. Table A, which is enrollment and contact hours. Table 7, which is adult education personnel or staff and volunteers. Table 14, which outlines your providers and how much funding they received. And then Table B, which outlines your providers, your sites where adult education programming is being offered, and any other members that you have in your consortium. Note this year that Table B is actually split into a couple tabs, so it'll be a little bit different than last year, and actually all the tables will be different this year because instead of filling them out on an Excel spreadsheet, you will actually be entering that data directly into SERVs. So let's go to the next slide and we can actually start diving into these tables. So this is what the tables will look like when you go into the application in MEGS. This is Table A. Table A again shows your entire enrollment and contact hours by adult education entry level. And then there's some special categories at the bottom for non-federal funded entities. But you can see here that it does look different. It's not just filling out the Excel spreadsheet, but you need to kind of hand enter that data into each specific cell. So it is a little different. And you can see how at the top, how you can see the 4 tabs for the 4 tables. So this is Table A. A couple points about Table A on the next slide. One, remember you can get this data directly from SID. And so what you want to do is, as you're pulling this data in SID, which is you want to look at the start date, use the start date of May 1st, 2023, and the end date of April 30th, 2024. So when you go into SID, those are the dates that you want to set for the parameters in order to download your version of Table A. Let's go to the next slide. And then just a couple of additional points for this table. The data in this table is crucial. It is tied directly to your funding. This table affects your funding, your grants funding, more than any other table for the upcoming year. So please make sure you download this carefully and make sure it's entered accurately into MEGS. The hours reported on Table A will be used in our official aid calculation for funding. We do not directly have access or data uploaded from SID, but we use what you submit in MEGS as the official aid. You want to make sure you're checking this data carefully because any data entry errors can result in a loss of funding for your consortium. And then also, you will need to keep a copy of the Table A report from SID as a PDF or as an Excel for your own records, because we are going to have you verify those hours and verify that data later. And you'll want to verify that all the April hours have been entered in SID before you run the report in SID and before you upload that data or start entering data into MEGS. So make sure that April data is all entered first. And then once that April data is complete, then you can start loading or downloading that table and entering that data, the Table A data, into MEGS. Jody.
Thanks, Brad. So the next table that we want to remind you about is table 7. Again, table 7 is the same as last year, with the important difference that you will enter the data directly into MEGS and not into a spreadsheet. Table 7 is about your staff and dividing them up by their role and how many are part-time and how many are full-time. On the next slide, there's just a couple of pointers about table 7. Table 7 is the easiest table, so that is good news. What you will do is run your table 7 report in SID. SID will automatically be calculating, the years of experience and a few other factors for your staff. And so SID will put the right numbers in this report. However, we always recommend that when you run that report in SID, check and make sure that your staff and volunteer numbers are in the ballpark. Because the mistake that's easy to make is if there are not end dates added when staff or volunteers leave, then SID will just keep counting them. So if it looks like you have too many when you eyeball that report, be sure to pull the list of your staff names and volunteer names and check and make sure if there are staff who have left or volunteers who are no longer active, that somebody goes into SID and adds an end date for those folks, and then run the report again and it should look correct. Once you have that report run, then you will need to key that data directly into MEGS. But that's pretty much all you need to know about table 7.
Excellent. Now let's go into table 14. Table 14 outlines all of your providers. Again, a provider is an entity that is receiving state and federal ABE funds to provide adult education services. And what funding they receive, whether it's federal funding or state adult education funding. And so you can see the chart here. No different, not many differences from last year, but again, you're entering this directly into MEGS instead of into a spreadsheet. Let's go to the next slide. So with this, you will want to include on table 14 all of your state ABE funding, all of your federal ABE funding, and all of the IELCE, or Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education grant funds that any provider in your consortium receives as a grant. In column E, note that that is a federal funds total. The federal funds total in column E should match the total federal ABE award plus any IELCE grant award amounts for all providers in the consortium. So you want to have your award letter accessible for the current year, as well as any IELCE award OGANs in order to verify those amounts. And then in column G, that is your total of state funds, or that's where you're outlining your state funds by type of organization. And that total, again, at the bottom for state funds, should match on your award letter your state ABE award amount. So just note that those are you can do a little bit of cross-checking yourself by having your award letters handy in filling out table 14. One change in table 14 this year, and this is due to advocacy that we have been doing with the federal government as well as some other states. There is a new row added for type of organization that is a tribal government or tribal organization. So you'll see that new row added. So that will make some of your organizations, instead of putting it in an other category, there is now a designated category for tribal governments or tribal organizations, which we are glad to see there. Let's go to the next slide. Then I'm going to hand it back over to Jody.
Great. So the last table of the 4 is table B. So again, you will be entering the same information that we asked a year ago, but different format because you'll now be entering it directly into MEGS. So I would say of the 4 tables, this is the one that looks the most different when you look at it in MEGS. But we hope actually that this is going to be a little bit more straightforward to fill out now than it was on the spreadsheet. So that is really good news. So one thing to notice about table B is that when you click on the tab for table B, you might think, oh, nothing is happening. We just want you to know, just a heads up, that this particular table, because it has so many data fields, runs a little more slowly than the rest. So you just need to give it a little bit of time. Just after you click, relax for a little bit and it will load, but it does take a little bit of time. So don't be worried or surprised by that. So some reminders for the first part of table B is where you are entering providers and sites. So just a reminder again, to reiterate what Brad said about table 14, when we use the word provider, what we are talking about is any entity or organization that receives state and or federal adult education dollars and uses those funds to pay one or more teachers or instructors to provide ABE services or classes. So any provider should be listed in the first section of table B. For all of you, you have at least one provider, and that is your fiscal agent entity. But for many of you, the fiscal agent is getting the grant from MDE and then flowing some of those dollars downstream to additional providers. So you need to list out all of those providers on table B. In table 14, you need to tell us what kind of provider they are, whether they're a school district or a CBO or a tribal nation. But on table B, you need to actually name them and list them. So you're going to list out your providers, and then table B also asks for your sites. So this is the same as we've been asking you for several years. So you'll probably start with last year's table B. That'll be a good starting point. Probably many of your sites are the same. So when you are entering sites, be sure in the programming site column, be sure to use the actual name of the building, the way that people in the public refer to that building, right? So it could be community ed building, it could be high school, whatever the name of the building is if you were talking to somebody on the street. And also, please enter the complete mappable address, including the zip code. One of the things we do with this information from table B is to map different sites across the state of Minnesota. So please do include that full address and the format. So just a reminder, the format, right, of number with the street, comma, city, MN, and a zip code. So we do want you to enter your addresses just like that into table B. Then there is another section of table B. So you'll see more about this when Bet, excuse me, when Bet does a demo for us. But when you click on table B in MEGS, it will open up 4 tabs underneath that. The first tab that says ABE providers is where you can start entering your providers and your sites. If you have more than 5 providers, you can use that next tab that says providers 6 through 10. If you've got more than 10, which most of you don't, but a couple of you do, then you can use that third tab. We're just sort of splitting it up so there wasn't so much data on each page. That last tab is called Other Members. So this is where you're going to list other members of the consortium that are not ABE providers. So many of you in your consortium have school district members that sort of are part of the geographic area of your consortium, but they don't actually hire any adult ed teachers or provide any adult ed services themselves. One of the other districts sort of covers that area. So this is the place where you list all of those consortium members and their district number, if it's applicable. So I think at this point, we're just going to pause for a second and ask, or just give a little bit of time to see if anybody has any questions specifically about the tables. I'm not seeing any in the chat at the moment. Nice, Julie. Yes, definitely somebody is going to have to do some data entry for these tables. So yeah, just prepare yourself for that. I know for some of you, that'll probably be you. Maybe for some of you, that'll be, someone else that you work with, but yep. Data entry practice. All right, I don't see.
So if I have a EDIM, do I have MEGS access, or do
You
I
may
need to
not,
do?
Scott. You might, if you don't see MEGS when you log in through EDIM, that is likely because your Iowa has not given you access. So that is something you need to work through your business office and your Iowa
Okay.
to get
Yeah,
access.
I'm talking with them on separate chats, so I'm good to
Okay.
go there. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, no problem. Oh, excellent question, Caroline. Can you save your work and come back without having to do it all in one sitting? Yes, you definitely can. When you enter data into any page in MEGS, there is a save button at the bottom of the page. So you should definitely click save as you go. But yes, you can go in and out multiple times. Nate, I see your question. We have a school district in our consortium due to low enrollment, no longer have classes there. Would that be a member site? So for the sites that we want you to list on table B, we want you to think about this upcoming program year. So between July of this year through June of next year, where are you planning to have classes? So if at that site, you are not planning to have any classes there for the upcoming year, then you don't list it. If you think maybe, yeah, go ahead and list it. It's not, it isn't going to be a really important mistake either way. But we're just basically asking, where are you planning to offer programming? Clarice, I see your question about getting access. Yeah, yes. Yeah, strikes make everything more difficult, don't they? Yes, you can keep in touch with us, keep in touch with me. We will share in a little bit a general email for general MEGS support. Yep, we'll work with you, Clarice, for sure. We'll make it happen. All right. Thank you for your questions, everybody. I think at this point, I'm going to hand it back to Bet to talk about the rest of the application and then show us what it looks like in MEGS.
Thanks, Jody. So we'll continue on with a couple of more screenshots. We're just continuing to move through those tabs. We're now in the Assurances tab. Under Assurances, you can see that there is a Program Assurances, as well as if you say the acronym, it's FFATA information, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But first, Assurances. So these are your typical assurances that I'm sure you're all familiar with signing for any funds that you're receiving through MDE. Your Iowa has to sign it. I will show this in the demo, but at the top of the screen, there's a checkbox where they will, by select this option, they hereby certify that they have read and understand and will comply. And then they're going to need to scroll to the bottom of the page to click the Legal Entity Agrees button. Again, I'll show that in the demo, but just want to highlight that the Iowa will check a box at the top and then scroll to the bottom to click Legal Entity Agrees. The FFATA is a Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act. And so we'll ask everyone two questions that are related to FFATA. It is a report that we need to submit regularly. And so it is just data collection that we are gathering from you all about if you're receiving federal funds. And I don't know that I have said this before, but for both the assurances and FFATA, your Iowa could log in today and complete both of these parts and then not yet submit the application, and they could be done with that, and you all could do your data entry, and then the application could be submitted by June 3rd. It doesn't all have to happen at the same time. So if they happen to be in MEGS before June 3rd and before they're submitting, they can do it now. But it is also something that they could do and sign off on right before they are submitting on June 3rd. Once your Iowa is ready to submit, there is a button that is consistency check. And so this is essentially looking through the data that has been submitted and making sure that all of the columns are talking to each other. They seem to be filled out correctly, that all of the check boxes that needed to be checked are checked, that the contact information is filled out, and that it seems that data is all where it needs to be. So folks will click consistency check, and then either you're going to get a list of potential errors that exist, or it will lock down the application. You can unlock it, don't worry. But it will either tell you you have to fix these things or it's good to go and can be submitted. The next slide, I have an example of what some errors may look like. And so as you can see in the screenshot, it says consistency check completed. After correcting the errors noted below, the consistency check must be performed again. And so this is telling us that in the application narrative tab that the applicant didn't select what type of ABE funds the organization is applying for, and that they made a mistake in table B, and that table B, the total number of providers, has to match what was submitted in table 14. So I'll show you in the demo what the errors could look like, but just letting you know that there is a way to check and make sure that data seems to be where it belongs in the application. Once that consistency check has been passed, the application will lock. As you can see, there is an unlock button as well. So again, you can run the consistency check, and if you're not yet done, you're going to tweak some information, you can go back and update that. That's okay. But your Iowa, when they are logged in, will then have a button that says submit to MDE. If you are not the Iowa, you will not see the submit to MDE button. And so you will not be able to submit this application. It has to go through the Iowa. But you, as not the Iowa, can always run a consistency check. So anyone can run a consistency check, make sure the information is there. It is this the Iowa specifically who has to submit the assurances, FFATA, and submit to MDE. Once that submit to MDE button has been clicked, then this is what the screen will look like. It says the application has been submitted for review. And in this example, it's showing that the assurances were signed off on 4/26. The consistency check was run on 4/30, and then the LEA or organization administrator, which is our Iowa, they submitted the application on 4/30. So that is what everything will look like once the application has actually been submitted. And then I will do a demo. I'm just looking at questions. The Iowa grandfathered into using the MEGS system, or do they have to do something special? It should be the same person, but if there is an issue, the Iowa must submit the entire application or just the assurances. They will have to check the box for the assurances, but then they are also the ones submitting the application to MDE. All right, so I am going to share my screen and we are going to do a test. All right, so I am in a test environment, so it looks slightly different than what yours is going to look like. You won't see, this is a test. Yours will be the real deal. But when you log on, you will see this page. So either it's going to show the MEGS access button, and if it doesn't show this, then that is where you're going to contact your Iowa or your business office to get access to MEGS. Here are where the tiles all live. So I'll remind you that you have to select a fiscal year. And so we're looking at fiscal year 25 funds. And so make sure that you have selected the 2025 option. And we are adult basic education, state fin 322 and federal fin 438. Because I've been in here before, it's got some more information, and what I'm going to click on here is the view grant application. If this was the first time I was logging in to see this tile, it would look more like this central data one where there's create an application for, and you would click the 2025. So here I will zoom in a bit and try and balance making sure everyone can see, but also not see too much, so it's hard to work with. We've got our tabs at the top, and again, they go from left to right, top to bottom. So the project overview is going to give you that background information. You should read through all of that, but the information that you're actually going to start entering is going to be on the contact information tab first. And I was in here earlier and entered some information, so I have put in an address and phone numbers and all of that, but this would be either blank for you to enter yourself, or there is an option to select to pull information from agency central data application. This is going to be particularly pertinent for those of you who are with school districts that have been in MEGS before and have completed a central data application. So if that doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. You are able to enter the information, just type it in. But if you click the radio button and information self-populates, then that's great. You don't have to enter that yourself. Everyone is going to be asked to enter the adult education program contact, and that is something that everyone will need to fill up. You'll save the page, and then you can go on to the next section. And as the question had been asked before and Jody responded, but you don't need to have everything completed all at once. You can save and come back later. In the application narrative, again, it's more data background information than a real narrative, but it will ask you for your congressional district, the county that you're in, if you're a 501c3 organization, and then what kind of funding you're applying for. Additionally, it's going to ask you to have select which program status you're in. So if you're in a continuing consortium, if you're realigned or restructuring, or if you're new. So there's a drop-down menu, and you'll be able to select whichever one you are. If you are a realigned or restructured, you'll note that if you click it and then you save the page, there are going to be these 3 text boxes that open up where you'll identify any district members that you're adding, any district members that you're deleting, and if the fiscal agent is changing at all. If you're not realigned or restructured, you're continuing or new, and you save the page, that information will go away, so you don't need to, you won't need to fill that out because it's not pertinent to you. Then come the tables. So I've gone through and I've put some information in here just to give you a sense of what it looks like. But here's table A. Here's where you would, enter your number of enrollees, contact hours. There's some math that will happen that you won't need to do. So if the boxes are that darker gray and you can't type in there, that is a formula that's being run in the background. And when you save the page, those formulas will update. So if I were to change this to 60, it's not going to automatically update when I click out of it, but when I save the page and then I scroll down, then that number got updated. So saving the page is what's going to make those calculations happen. Table 7, it's more information that Brad and Jody had walked you through. Again, you'll save the page. There is notes here on what specifically you are supposed to be entering in each column. So should have all the information you need. And again, it's really not different from past the last year, just a new format of where you're putting it, but not asking different questions. In table 14, here we've got some more, you're going to be entering the data. And so one thing that we did want to work in an air, so you would be able to see what that looks like. So you can see here that I listed that there was a community-based organization, but I did not indicate what amount of federal funding they are receiving, or yep. And so you could do that, and then when you would click Save Page, you're going to get a warning at the top. And so this will happen for any of the information that you're entering. If you save a page and something is missing or the calculation is not quite right, this is where the warning lives. It's going to be at the top of the page. And so it's telling us federal or state funding amount is required for community-based organizations. And oh, yep, I didn't enter either a federal funding amount or a state funding amount. So I'm going to forgot to put that there. And let's say we'll put 1,000 there. Again, that math isn't going to automatically do the formula, but if you scroll down and save page, then that percentage automatically calculates. And I'll just say, if it's bothering you, the percent signs and the dollar signs being a little funky, that's because I've really zoomed in on my screen. If you zoom out or, fit the screen to page, it's going to look right. So just to let you know if that was bothering you, it doesn't have to. On table B, this is, again, that's the one. It's going to take a minute. So you can see up in the corner, it's thinking. It is loading. It's happening. It's just a lot of data fields that could exist, and so it takes a moment for the software to catch up. In the tabs, you can see table B, ABE providers 1 through 5, 6 through 10, 11 through 15, and then other members. So I've entered the information here. And then this is another one where I'm going to save the page. And it's going to tell me that there is an error because on table 14, I said that there were 2 providers and I had only entered the 1 provider. So thanks for reminding me. I will enter some information in. I'm just making this up, so. I'll scroll down, save. All right, no error. So I think everything's looking good. So at this point, if I'm a data person, I am going to contact my Iowa and let them know, I think everything's looking good. It's your turn to check out those assurances. So they can then log in, and again, they can do this at any time. So it doesn't have to be after you've entered information, but it may make sense to have them do everything all at once. But in the assurances tab, there is the checkbox that they'll select. And then we do want you all to read these assurances. So that's why we're asking you to scroll. It's the standard assurances that you're going to have seen in our past application materials. There's the programmatic ABE specific ones. Keep scrolling. And then this information is not, it's grayed out. You can't fill it in. But if you are logged in as the Iowa, you will have this button to click. That's legal entity agrees. If you're the data person, and not the Iowa, you won't have this button. So I'm going to click that as the Iowa. And now if you scroll down, you can see it's been filled out. There's a date and a typed name. So that's the programmatic assurances. And then there is the FFATA information. So again, just data collection that we're asking you to fill out. This is a standard question that we ask when we are offering federal money. So your Iowa will be familiar with this. They'll answer the questions, save page, and then they can go on to the submit button. So again, remember that a consistency check can be run by the program person, or it can be run by the Iowa. Anyone who is in the application can run a consistency check. So you or your Iowa will hit the consistency check button. It's going to think, it's looking through. It's going to tell me if anything is wrong. And for this one, luckily I had filled out all the information, so it was correct. And so it tells me that this locked the application, but you know what? What if I want to change something? I can unlock the application and then I can go back and I can change something. And I'll show you what it looks like to, we'll just save something simple to fix. So I'm not selecting a grant funding selection. I go to the submit button and I run the consistency check. And it's going to tell me that the application narrative tab, I must select which type of ABE funds the organization is applying for. So of course we know that, but you might miss it. So you would go back, you'd make the updates, save the page, and then you could run the consistency check again. And then again, if you are the Iowa, you're going to have the submit to MDE button. If you're not the Iowa, you won't have that. So you won't touch it. And I'm not going to do it right now because I want to see if there are questions. And if I submit, I won't be able to go back and make changes. So I'm going to check the chat now.
Bet the couple of questions that have come up in the chat. One is just about how to print your application, which I
Sure.
think you show. And also then a question from Eric about whether the FAFATA questions reference their ABE program specifically or the entire school district.
Sure. So FAFATA is going to be referencing your entire district. So it's all federal funding that you receive. And then, yeah, so there are more tabs here, you're right, that I haven't talked about. So I can go over those right now. Amendment description, that's not going to be relevant right now. This will come into play once an application has, been approved and you're an active grantee. Then you'll use that tab. Application history, we can see, it's going to start showing you some history. So there was a consistency check that was run. You can follow where the application is there. Communications, in test, it's not set up, but there would be, a way to send messages in MEGS. So that could be in communications for that specific user. So not currently relevant. And then the application print button, you can go there and you can select to print the application, in which case it's going to generate you a PDF of the application. And what you need to know is that this is a request that's processed every hour between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. And so if you were to request at, in this example, 2:48 p.m., you're going to get that PDF ready for you to download and look at 3:01 p.m., so on the next hour. And so this could be a tool for you if you are looking to, I think it's more of a tool when there are more narrative questions being asked, where they're more in a typical competitive grant opportunity, but certainly could be helpful for this time as well. But you would be able to indicate which part of the application that you want to print and then request print. And then that information will show up for you in MEGS. So it says once completed, a link to the PDF will display on the right side of the page under completed print jobs. And so that is what that print section is all about. That's a good question. And then looking at the questions, how does the Iowa know exactly what needs to happen to be submitted? So it'll be a little bit of a learning curve too. And also I will say again, if you are with a district, Iowas have been submitting information for formula funding that has existed. So MEGS is not brand new to Iowa's today in the same way that it might be for you. You also may know plenty about MEGS and already be in there. It really is going to depend on your district, how many staff you have and all of that. But your Iowas should be familiar with MEGS if you are a district. If not, then yeah, there's going to be some learning, and we're here as a resource. You can use the PDF that we put in the chat of kind of each of the steps that you can do. And the highlights that they need to know is that they need to sign off on the assurances, the FATA information, and then they need to hit the blue button that says submit to MDE when they are on the submit page. Any other questions, Jody or Brad, that I missed?
I think that you got the specific questions that it
Okay.
was helpful to show on the screen. So maybe we can have Neil go back and share their screen again, because there's a support email that on the next slide that we want to share with you.
Perfect. Yeah, so we know it's a new system. There's going to be questions and we're here to support you. So this email address, megs.mde@state.mn.us, is going to be a great resource for you. If you have questions, send your questions to that account and we'll figure out what we need to do to make sure that you are in there and are able to submit. Well, that wraps up my section, so I'll pass it back to, looks like, Brad.
Thank you, Bets. Thank you, Jody. Thanks everyone for all of your questions. I really do appreciate you looking at this and trying to figure it out. It is a new system, and so there's a learning curve to it. Hopefully, as you learn this, though, you'll see how, like, hopefully this will click, and then you'll see, oh wow, this is much easier to use than serves was. So that's our goal. Is we want is that by the end of this application process, you see that. Any additional questions? I know some of you have been seeing some additional, like have had some very specific, like, hey, I'm not sure how I see this within my specific program. And so I can see that some of you will be emailing either the MEGS email or be emailing us directly to ask a question. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that, that you feel prepared to complete this report, this application with your team. Any additional questions for folks, for either us in adult education, for our grant specialists, for any for our MEGS developers on the call?
Brad, Tracy has her hand up.
Yeah, excellent. Go ahead, Tracy.
So I realize that this application needs to be in MEGS, but
Yep.
what about for, like the funding through June 30 for the federal and state funding? Do they still go through the SERV system, or?
Yes. So all the funding for our current year, even as we start transitioning into MEGS, but this current year funding will stay in SERVs. Great question, Tracy. So your business office for this current year's funding, that would wrap up June 30th. And then you have some additional time for your business office to kind of make any claims or to draw down expenditures. That will still stay in SERVs. So the money that is the first money for adult education that will be in MEGS will be our federal adult education money. That would be funding that would start July 1, 2024. But again, you won't know that exact amount and you can't exactly access that starting July 1. You won't know that amount probably till a little bit later.
Brad, we have another question in the chat from Becca. Should there be the same number of providers on table 14 as on table B?
Yes, there should be the same number of providers on table 14 as there are on table B.
And I'll just add a little to that. Now
Yes.
that this is in MEGS, if you do not have the same number of providers on table 14 as on table B, it will give you an error and you will not be able to pass that consistency check. So now we have sort of an additional layer to make sure that those numbers match on those two tables.
Great point. Thank you, Jody. I think we can stop the recording.